Jake Hirschman here with Quashan Lockett, VP of HR at Legends, to talk a little bit about professionalism within your personal brand. Quashan, welcome and excited to get into dressing the part, a little bit of virtual communication, social media, all that good stuff.
Jake, thanks for having me. Excited to be here and looking forward to the conversation.
Absolutely. So I would like to think, just starting off, we're doing a little bit of an informational interview here, right? I've got somewhat of the dress the part, right? You've got your dress the part. So let's start with that. What's the appropriate wear for an informational interview if you're doing Zoom on video versus a phone call versus maybe a career fair or something of that sort?
Yeah, so my dress the part is very casual. I work in sports where Legends is a very casual, laid back environment and culture and just being connected to sports. But from an interview standpoint, and before you kind of get into the organization, I guess first thing I would say is information is powerful. So as much as if you're working with a recruiter or wherever you're working with, ask the question. Just like what's the dress code or recommended attire, and if you're doing a Zoom interview, or certainly if you're in person, I would always assume that, hey, I should be professional business dressed if you're doing in person. But in this day of virtual interviewing, it's okay to ask, like, hey, what's the culture, and you can get a little bit, like, you can start gleaning a little bit about what the culture is of the organization right away. So I would ask the recruiter, hey, what's the recommended, should I dress in suit and tie or business professional dress? Like, it's okay to ask that question. Um, for a phone call where you're not visual, like, obviously be comfortable in what you kind of want to dress. I always think that, there's certain power in dressing up even when you're in or doing a phone interview and the person can't see you. It makes you feel like you're doing something in person, right? So it maybe gives you a little bit more energy. But obviously, if the interviewer can't see you, then what your dress is kind of up to you. But I guess ultimately, to wrap it up, I would say in person, I would always assume that business attire unless the organization tells you otherwise. And then for like these virtual settings, it's okay to ask and try to get some insights on the culture and what the dress requirements are.
And with a career fair or any sort of conference, you kind of never know who you're going to meet, right? And so
Right.
you want to make sure that you dress up as opposed to, you know, you go and let's just say you get really lucky and you get an interview and it's for an actual internship or a job, and that person's in a suit and tie, but you've got just a collared shirt on, right? And
Exactly.
then is that really the greatest look as opposed to if you're on par with them? Um, Again, a little bit more of a professional look, you're prepared. Make sure that you have kind of the understanding of who you might be meeting with as well, right? If
Absolutely.
it's if you somehow know the culture of Legends and you know that it's a Legends career fair, you might understand that it's a little bit more casual and you can go the route that you need to. So talk a little bit about the career fair approach, dressing up, what that needs to look like, because I know it sounds simple, but suit and tie is for men, but how do you go about for the women's side of things? And there's a difference.
Yeah. And so I think you hit it right on the nail, right? In terms of a college fair or a career fair where you've got multiple employers, you always want to, I would rather be overdressed than underdressed, right? And so just go ahead and do that. And you can always, if you're a man, you can always take the tie off or take the suit jacket off and kind of take it down a little bit if you notice, okay, the environment's a little bit more casual, but going in, definitely want to be more overdressed than underdressed in terms of how you're approaching it. For women, business suits, pantsuit, same thing. If it turns out to be a little bit more casual, you can always take the jacket off, and so dress up and then scale down if you can by taking off ties and jackets depending on what the environment is. I would say there's probably a cap in terms of like casual. Like, you don't want to show up in like shorts and a t-shirt. Like, so like when I say, hey, casual versus professional business dress, like casual in terms of a career fair or interview is like you're probably like a button up shirt, right, and slacks or something like that for men, or if depending on the company culture, maybe a polo shirt or something like that. But like shorts and a t-shirt or a tank top or flip-flops, like that is beyond like what I want to make sure everybody understands. Like that's not the level we're talking about when we say a little bit more, casual or business casual.
Yeah, the business casual phrasing could depend on whether you're East Coast, West Coast, Midwest, right? It kind
Right.
of means a little bit of different depending on the culture and where you are. So just to assume that it's, that next level is a great assumption on your end. Um, you never want to be the worst dressed in the room. Obviously, there might be people who just don't get it and they don't get the message, right? And that's okay. You're ahead of them. But when you think about that first impression and being able to utilize how you dress and professionally dress as that first impression. um, Talk a little bit about posture, carrying yourself a certain way, right? Because it's one thing to dress one way, but also to act like it and to kind of fill it out.
Yeah, so I think, as a candidate, and especially coming out of college, you've got to think like the interviewer a little bit. So, right. So if I'm an interviewer, what am I looking for? You probably haven't had the direct right working experience, right? And so what things am I going to look for is less of that, maybe a little bit, like maybe if you've done internships, I'm kind of looking for that, but more so I'm looking for, okay, is this person going to fit with our organization and our culture? And so, think about, like, that's where your research comes in. You're going to want to, if it's legends, researching legends, researching the people that work at legends, maybe doing some networking to kind of get some insights, and then coming to the table with, okay, if legends is, their culture is a little bit more laid back, and then so you want to kind of make that connection with the interviewer. The more you can get to know the interviewer beforehand, the better, because then you can kind of match your style to his or hers, right? So if that person is a little bit more laid back and conversational, then that's kind of where you should be going. If that person is very matter of fact and kind of fact based and kind of to the point, then that's kind of how you should be thinking of it as well. And so always prepare for the interview, knowing the organization, knowing the person you're going to be meeting with. Now, in the case of a career fair, you may not know, right? You don't know which recruiters are going to show up. So you're kind of, preparing for a little bit of everything, right? But you should know the organizations at the very least, know the position that they have available or may have available, and then just glean as much information as you can. One thing I used to do way back when, I was kind of doing career fairs and different things is walk around a little bit, like hear the conversations that are happening, that other people are having conversations with the interviewers. If it's like an open style, I don't even know if they kind of still do these, but like the open style career fair, you can kind of hear some of the conversations. Not that you're trying to like eavesdrop or anything, but you can kind of hear the flow and the pace of the conversation and what recruiters and organizations are talking about. That way, okay, all right, I got a little bit of insight into how they're doing this, and then you can kind of go in and be a little bit more prepared. So like walk the room a little bit before kind of jumping right in.
There's a lot of preparation that goes into it, but then let's talk about the social media side of things, because that's there to stay no matter what no matter what you've done in the last week, month, year, 2 years, etc. That's something as an HR expert and individual in the industry. Just talk through the process of how you go about looking at social media, what you're looking for, what to be aware of as an individual, of what I should and shouldn't have on there. I think we all kind of have heard of that saying about if you don't want your grandma to see it, don't put it up there, kind of thing. But just talk a little bit about that part.
Yeah, I guess first and foremost, I would say, and hopefully everybody knows this, but like if you put something on social media, assume it's there to stay. Like I don't care if there's a delete button or anything like that. If you post it, like assume it's there forever, right? There's phones, people can screenshot stuff, they can take a picture of stuff. Even if you posted it for 1 minute and then said, oh, I didn't mean to do that, or maybe I shouldn't have posted that, and take it down. Assume that somebody saw it, right? And so just you have to be very careful about that. I think the other thing is your brand, right? And so you have to know your brand. And so social media is an extension of who you are and what you want your brand to be. And again, thinking of your personal brand as not even just where you are today, but like where do you want to be as you go 4, 5, 10, 15 plus years from now? What is that ultimate goal, and starting to shape that brand, where you sit right now, for the future of you. And so, as an employer, and as someone, in HR, someone who hires, things I'm looking at on social media is really, okay, what is this person's brand? Like, how are they conducting themselves? What content are they putting out there? Like, so if you're in a particular area, or an area you're trying to get into, what conversations are you having, right? What insights are you kind of putting out there on social media that make me say, that's interesting, and this person has a perspective, and even if the perspective is different from mine, like that's completely fine. That's actually what I'm looking for. Is this person has a brain, has a thought process, and kind of, is putting good content out there. But it ultimately just comes back to that brand. And so everything you post on different social media platforms, your profile picture, all that stuff, who you're connected to, that is all part of your brand, going forward.
Is it safe to say that if you don't have a huge need for it, you might as well delete it?
In terms of the platforms themselves,
Yeah.
the social media
Yeah.
stuff.
Like obviously LinkedIn is a very career oriented social media platform, right? But the others, Facebook, Instagram, Snapchat, all those, if you don't really use it or use it very often in your brand, you're not putting a lot of time into putting the brand out there and everything. I mean, does it make sense to just get rid of it?
Yeah, I think, that's a good point. And I'll even say, for me personally, I deleted Facebook, like, and this is, I don't know, 10 years ago, or 7 years ago. And because it wasn't even necessarily that I didn't need it or didn't use it, is I just didn't see how it like fit into like who I wanted to be. Right. And so like the content that was there and just the engagements that were happening, just, it wasn't me. Right. And so like I didn't really have a use for it, I guess, to your point. And so, I just deleted it, and like there's one less thing to worry about, right? And so you make a good point, is think about, like, in different platforms for different reasons, right? You may have Facebook because you've got distant relatives who you keep in touch with, and that's great. And so for that case, you have a good use case for Facebook. Or Instagram, it may be connecting from a visibility standpoint, or photos, or however you use that. So you just need to know, like, be intentional about how you're using the platforms and what purpose they serve, for you, either from a career standpoint or from a personal standpoint.
Yeah, because you kind of have to just assume that one might say, "Oh, well, that's my personal Twitter, not my professional Twitter." No, it's the same thing. It's
Exactly.
all professional. Once you enter the professional world, right? It's everything, as you mentioned in our session about self-reflection, right? It's all integration. So whatever's out there, that's now you as a person and a professional. When you think about utilizing it though to your advantage of being professional, and being able to your point, portray the brand that you want to for years to come, how do you go about utilizing the social media platforms to do so, and communicate the right way? Because we hear a lot of times, I'm a fan of this team, or I'm a fan of this sport. Well, what if you're a fan of the Browns and you talk trash on the Steelers, but then you're interviewing with the Steelers for an internship, right?
Yeah,
You're gonna take that job if you get it, but you're not gonna get it if you were trashing them 2 years ago because you were a fan of the Browns, right?
and that goes back to really having a intentional future focus sort of outlook on your career. And so you can have a professional team that you follow, but like if you want to be in the sports industry, probably not a good idea to make a negative post. Like if you're a Cowboys fan, you probably don't want to talk bad about the Giants, or the Eagles, or anyone else, right? Because like you can have your fandom, that's fine, but once you get into sports, like, people are going to look at that, right? So you just have to be, very thoughtful about, and it also shows the emotional intelligence, right? So this person is willing to go on social media and post something negative about, a team, based on, just from a fandom standpoint, but is also working in the industry. Like, it just shows a level of sort of, maturity and emotional intelligence that may not be there. And so you want to save that for, just conversations you're having offline, versus kind of posting some of that on the internet. Because again, assume that once you post it, it's there forever. Again, snap, screenshots, camera phones. Assume someone saw it, even if you deleted it 2 minutes later.
No, that's great. We'll jump from the social media as we start to wrap up. I think, when you get into that informational interview or a Zoom interview, sometimes it can be awkward. Where do you start? What question do you ask? Do you talk about the weather? Do you talk about where you are? I mean, again, just being professional though, right? You're not going to be like, oh man, I was out late last night. You're not talking about that stuff when you first get into a conversation as you might with your friend, right? And so from a professionalism standpoint, how do you go about kind of bridging that icebreaker in the conversation, again, keeping it professional and authentic?
Yeah, the key there for me is, is doing some research on that person, right? And so rather than doing like an arbitrary sort of small talk of, oh, it's snowing outside, or it's, how's the weather, and those type of things, like something very easy is research who you're interviewing with. And like one thing would be like, where's that person from, right? And so is there a connectivity there, or what school they went to, or like what groups are they part of on LinkedIn, or who else are you connected to similar people? And so like you have an intentional sort of topic to bring up if there's some sort of dead silence, versus like how's the weather where you are, or something like that. So, and that's very easy to do. There's at least one thing you can find out through research simply on LinkedIn of, where does that person live, or where are they from, what school did they go to, who are they connected to, what's their career path been, and like then you can kind of come up with some very thoughtful sort of questions and dialogue versus sort of the arbitrary stuff.
And Google's your friend. I mean, there's news that happen every single day. So you might launch a new campaign for something, or there might be an event or a game or whatever. So don't be afraid to talk about those things, right?
Absolutely.
Even
If that
even if
person
it's not in your area, right? I mean, of expertise.
Yeah, absolutely. If that person did, a speaking engagement on a topic, and was talking about something, like connect on that. If they're in marketing and if their company just launched a marketing campaign and they had a hand in that, or if they're in HR and there was, something out there that, you saw the HR function in the company did, or, whatever it might be, like make a connection there. And it may not be your area of expertise, but you can come up with some very intentional and thought provoking sort of questions and conversation around that.
So being professional to start off the call is one thing, but then to wrap up the call and end the call in a way of whether it's follow up, right? Professional follow up, asking how they can, follow up for the next time. What are your suggestions on, again, the right questions, the right way to go about wrapping up a call or
Yeah.
an interview?
So wrapping up, you definitely have to have some really thought out good questions for the interviewer. And not, I can always tell if this person is just asking questions to fill the time, or if they're asking me really insightful questions because they're trying to get to know me and trying to get to know the organization, if they're trying to understand how they fit in and can make an impact, right? You can really tell if you're a good interviewer, and I usually can tell, is this person just asking just random questions because they know they have to ask questions, like people tell them they have to ask questions, or are they really asking insightful questions that are thought provoking, and I can see how they're trying to make that connection and make a decision if this is a place they want to be. Also, like prepare questions beforehand, but also like if we talked about it in the interview, don't ask me the question if we've already had that conversation. So you have to like keep track of, you may have some preloaded questions, which is great, you should do that. But like if we had the conversation on that and you were able to kind of, or at least you should have been able to glean an answer from what we talked about, then you need to scratch that question off and come up with additional questions throughout the course of the conversation.
Yeah, and from a follow-up perspective, right, professionally speaking, what's the appropriate way to follow up with someone for an informational interview versus an actual job interview? Um, you're probably going to go about it a little bit differently, correct?
Oh, absolutely. I think for an informational interviewing, I think that really connects to the networking piece, which we talked a little bit about, is, try to, again, trying to see, yourself and where you want to be sort of long term, and kind of identifying who are those people in the industry that I want to be a part of. And then really networking with them, And again, networking is a two-way street, right? So you need to be thinking about what pain points or what things can I help them out with, versus just what they can do for me, and kind of do both. And from there, it's like, okay, once you kind of build that relationship, and when I say relationship, it's not like you've known the person for 5, 10 years, but you have that connection. Then it's, hey, requesting an informational interview, and you maybe you don't even have to call it that, right? Like if you're having conversations, your line of questioning, your dialogue should just really be with that in focus. If it's a formal, like, hey, I want to interview for a position with the organization, again, that has some networking in it as well. But as you're building your networking, you're building your brand. You may hear about these opportunities before they even become sort of public knowledge. So again, if you're networking and you're doing things the right way, you have sort of an inside track to opportunities as they come up.
And last question as we finish, the environment in which you are in which you take the call is extremely important as well, right? If you're
Absolutely.
up on a roof and it's windy, I mean, that's probably not the best place to take a call, right? You want to be similar to how we are right now, kind of in that quiet space, ability to, whether it's a desk, you're taking some notes, you have a screen in front of you, whatever the case might be, no distractions. I mentioned a few, but I'm sure you've got a few more insights as well.
Yeah, definitely quiet space, free of distractions, where you can focus. If you're doing Zoom interview, I had one candidate who, we were doing a Zoom interview, and the person kept their camera off the entire time. Now, I understand, like, we're living in this COVID environment, and personal and work is sort of converging, and so I get that. But in that case where, like, you just can't avoid it, maybe you have something going on in the background, and maybe you thought you were going to have a quiet space, and things change throughout the day, and then you're kind of doing the interview and you're not in the best place. Be transparent. Let the interview know, like, email them beforehand if possible, and say, hey, had something come up, can still do the interview, but are you okay if I leave my camera? Like, so just be transparent with that, versus like kind of jumping into it and then like just having your your camera off or anything like that. And then just think, your brand and professionalism. So quiet space, free of distractions. Think about your background, like what's in the background. To make sure there's nothing inappropriate in the background or anything like that. So just be mindful when you're on camera.
And sometimes those things in the background can spark a conversation, right? We can, you've got your helmet in the background. I could talk a little bit about the Cowboys if we wanted to, or, I've got a book and that sort of thing. And so, Koshan, when you think about how to end the conversation or know when to end the conversation, you might be in person, you have some verbal cues, maybe the person's, fidgeting or whatever, or if you're on the phone, you might hear the person typing or something like that. How do you know those types of cues to understand when that conversation might be starting to wrap up?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think the first thing is, be mindful of the time, right? And so each interview is usually set for a time, whether it's 30 minutes, 45 minutes, an hour. So you have to be very mindful about where you are in that time frame. And if it's a 45-minute interview and you're 40 minutes in, like, you got to start thinking about, okay, how am I gonna, right? Unless the interviewer is giving you clues that, like, it's okay to keep going, and they're engaged and whatnot. But like, be very, very mindful of the time, and the interviewer's time, and schedule. And so if you're getting close to that cap, like, just, okay, I need to start thinking about, okay, how am I going to leave a lasting impression? How am I going to wrap it up? How am I going to make sure I got all my questions in? Um, and then, like, what's my follow-up going to be, right? And so that's another part of it. After you actually end the conversation, like, you've got more work to do, right? Email note, or thank you note, or like, however, social media, however, like the cues of that organization are, like, you've got to follow up, and kind of keep that engagement. So that would be first and foremost. I think, it should really always be a conversation. Like, if you're getting into, like, you don't want to get into an interview and it's just sort of like dry question and answer, because that's not what an interview is. And so, like, be very mindful again of the pace and just the tone of the interview. And like, if the interviewer is not opening up, like, you got to come up with some questions to get that person talking. I always think, like, your goal as an as a person interviewing should want the interviewer to talk more than you are. Because if you get the interviewer talking, then you're getting insights and information about who that person is, the organization, the culture, and all those different things. So if, really it's a kind of back and forth battle, but like if you can get that person talking as much as you're talking, then I think you're in a great spot. If you find yourself where you as the interviewee is doing all the talking, then you probably haven't learned nearly enough about the organization and the culture and all those things.
Last thing, when you think about showing up on time for a Zoom interview, you might log on 5 minutes early, but with a phone interview, you're not calling the person 5 minutes early. So how do you make sure that you've got, again, being professional, respecting people's time?
Yeah, so I think on a phone interview, most of the time the interviewer is calling you, so that's a good thing, right? And so you just have to be ready and have your phone ready, make sure you don't miss the call. On a Zoom call or a virtual interview where you're logging in, I always say at least 3 minutes before the scheduled time, and that allows you to get in there, turn the camera on. Okay, what's in the background? What's my posture? Any distractions, and like you don't want to be logging on at the same time as the interviewer, because then that doesn't give you any. Then you're just like, all right, jump in and go, right? And so you want to give yourself at least 3 minutes. Depending on what the interview is, maybe 5 minutes, but just some time ahead of time to get in there by yourself, turn the camera on, get prepared, get your notes or whatever else you have, what's in the background, and just kind of get prepared for that.
No, it's fantastic. Thank you for your time, Kushan, on talking about professionalism within, your personal professional brand. Appreciate the time.
All right, Jake, thank you. I appreciate it.